you only have one copy of the pattern and you are using transparent glass, it's no problem. You can just use your magic marker and trace around the pattern on top of the glass. I always number my pattern pieces so that it'll be easy to put back together. I also use large numbers in case the pattern could easily be turned one way or the other. If your glass is not transparent but it's opaque and you have a light table, then you can put your glass over top of the pattern on your light table and trace around it that way. I'm going to demonstrate more fully how to use your copper foil scissors, and cutting out your pattern. Let's see if we can find the little tail of, there it is. See the little tail of paper sticking out? It leaves room for your copper foil so that you don't have to do more grinding after you put the copper foil on, because it's such a tight fit. And then after we get the whole pattern cut out, and again, I'm just cutting in between pieces of where pieces of glass will fit on the outside edge of a piece of glass. Just use normal scissors because it's less painful. But see, you can see how pieces of paper get stuck in there. It's a little bit of a pain to use, but it sure saves in the grinding. It's hard to turn corners in these. There's little pieces of paper everywhere. So now we have our pattern that is just a little bit smaller because of using our special scissors. And we have two choices. We can either tape it to the glass and use that as our guide, or we can draw around it and use that as our guide. Taping it is probably more accurate, but whichever one works for you is fine. So now I'll tape this to the pattern or to the glass, and then I'll cut around it. Something I didn't talk about before was why I'm cutting on this grid system. It's made by Morton. They have a couple different straight line systems that they produce. One is called the Beetle Bits, and that's that one. It cuts wonderfully straight lines. And the other one's just called the Morton system, and that one is good depending on the user who's using it. And both of them are for cutting straight lines. So I start at one end, go to the other, all the way to the end. You don't ever go like this. You don't go back and forth. You don't go over the line twice. You just do it once. The reason I like cutting on the grid system made by Morton is because little shards of glass come off, and if they're on your working surface, your table, they'll scratch the underneath side of your glass, so it protects your glass. This is my example of where I'm using black marker to cut. I traced it over a light table, or I could have traced around my cut out pieces that I used with my special pattern scissors. I could have done that as well with the marker, or I could have taped it on. It doesn't matter. But what we do need to know is you want to cut on the inside of that black line to leave room for the copper foil. And again, I'm going to go straight off the edge just so that I don't have to, my break line doesn't have to follow a sharp angle. Again, I'm lining up my running pliers with the score line. That glass broke nicely, better than the other glass I'm using. Now this inside curve is going to be nearly impossible. That's a poor design. You want to stand up when you're scoring glass to give your arm more strength. Let's see if I can get this a little bit. When you're cutting inside curves, you slowly chip away at it with your scoring tool. This time I'll use my Grosers. When you're using Grosers, you go perpendicular to the line. And this little section, I think maybe I will try using my grinder head to just grind out that little section. And you can see I have a little point here that I'm going to have to grind off. A little point here I'm going to have to grind off. I'll probably have to grind a little more all along here, but I am going to show you my favorite way to transfer your pattern onto glass. First, tape down poster board. Then tape down carbon paper. Then tape down your pattern. All of them are taped down at one end so that as you're tracing, you can lift it and see if you've missed someplace. I don't think I've missed any lines. Oops, I missed those lines. If your glass has swirls of color on it, then you'll want to plan out how those swirls of color appear on each pattern piece. I do that by just marking around it and looking and see if that's the way I want it to appear. Here's an example of me using cardstock or poster board to use for my pattern guide. You can either use glue stick to glue it on with, or you can use double-sided tape. So I tape on or glue on my pattern piece onto the glass. I had to turn the glass upside down, put the pattern upside down, and recut it. The other side being textured did not break correctly. I had too many starts and stops on the textured side of the glass, so I had to start over with this piece. But as you can see how close that pattern, I was able to cut to that pattern. That saves a lot of time on grinding. And I, on purpose, went off the edge, not following the pattern to try to make sure that it didn't break incorrectly. Now I'll do some more score lines on this side of the pattern. The difference with running pliers versus Grosers. These are Grosers and these are running pliers. Running pliers need the full width of this in order to break the glass correctly. And they also can't do real sharp corners. Not that any of them, that you should ever do real sharp corners, but this is a small little piece, and so I'm going to have to use my Grosers. And with Grosers, you go perpendicular to the score line. Don't take off the pattern off of your cut glass until you have matched up the glass with the pattern. You'll want to go to the grinder and grind it right to the edge of your pattern. And that way it'll more likely fit correctly as soon as you put it on your overall pattern. Next, in order to find out if all my pattern pieces fit well together, I need them to be stable. And in order to be stable, because when I push one, another one pushes, I need to pin them down somehow. So I use ceiling tile, so push pins and sewing pins all will stick into that. On a project that is not rectangular or square, I use push pins on the outside of the project. Now, if your project is rectangular or square, you use these edging pieces to go around the outside edge of your project. If you're making a rectangular or square project, you use this edging, and it's called the Morton Layout System. And it has little pinholes in it that you can put your push pins in to hold everything in place and to keep your project square and tight. I use the push pins to hold everything in place tightly, and then I use these skinny pins to tell me where it's fitting tightly and where it's not. See, it goes right through up to that point, and that's where it's touching. So that's when I know I need to grind right there. I use my marker and tell myself I need to grind right there. And then I put it back together and see how it fits. This is a handy little tip that I seldom do, but I think it's a great idea. See how my pattern is shiny? This is a small pattern. I was able to just use packing tape on it. I don't have any ability to laminate, but a friend of mine uses a transparent plastic tablecloth and puts over top of her pattern, because as you're grinding, unless you take extra steps to dry off each pattern piece after grinding, it gets your paper pattern wet and that can start tearing. So if you have protected your pattern, then you don't have to take that extra step and dry off each piece after grinding. In video number 1, I needed a pattern or 2 patterns. I needed push pins. I needed a ceiling tile. On my second pattern, I could choose to use the lead scissors and needed the normal scissors on the outside edge. Needed the double-sided tape to tape it down onto the glass. And then I needed my scoring tool and then Grosier pliers and running pliers. And I use a grid system for cutting on. You could figure something else out if you didn't have that. This is the grinder I use. I use something to hold the mess underneath, the splash guard to hold the mess behind, the safety glass to keep the glass from hitting your eyes, and you fill it with water. Make sure the sponge in the back is wet, and so touching the water well underneath as well as touching the grinder head, so the grinder head is always getting wet as you're using it.